Today I want to talk about the beauty of simplicity. There's several verses within Scripture that really kind of sum up the idea that when it comes to serving God, it's really not that difficult. You don't have to go too deep or be too intellectual to figure out exactly what He wants. In the New Testament, when Jesus was asked what the greatest commandments were, He talked about loving God with all of our heart and soul and mind and strength, and loving our neighbor as ourselves. Now, Jesus was still under the Old Testament law, under the law of Moses, and that law continued until He was crucified on the cross and then rose 3 days later from the dead. But these principles of loving God with all of our heart and loving our neighbor as ourselves have gone on into the New Testament dispensation as well, or the covenant that we're under now, the Christian dispensation. And it's simple. When Jesus was talking about this, He wasn't minimizing the importance of the rest of the old law, not just the 10 Commandments, but the hundreds of other laws that were given that the Jews were to abide by. He was just kind of summing them up and pointing out, if you do these things, the idea is that you won't have a problem with the rest. There's a similar passage in Micah in the Old Testament, Micah chapter 6, verse 8, and it simply says this: "What does the Lord require of you? But to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." Now, Micah was a prophet to the Jews. He lived under the law of Moses, and again, he was not at all minimizing the rest of the law, including the 10 Commandments. He was just pointing out that when it comes to serving God and meeting His requirements, it's really not that difficult. It's rather basic. It involves justice tempered with mercy and living your life every day to the best of your ability before God. Walking humbly with your God was the way that Micah was inspired to write it. Well, this simplicity is really one of the great keys to a happy and contented life. I remember when I was little, things were a lot simpler. We didn't have quite as many distractions when I was growing up. I like a lot of the distractions today, don't get me wrong, but there was no such thing as the internet. There were no such things as video games. And there wasn't many things on television during the daytime if it wasn't a Saturday or a Sunday. It was mainly just soap operas and exercise shows and other things that kids didn't want to watch anyway. And our parents didn't want us in the house, especially in the summertime. They wanted us outside playing, getting fresh air and running and exercising, playing with the other kids, getting out from underneath their feet. And so that created something of a simple life when I was growing up. You'd get up in the morning, you'd make up your bed, you'd eat breakfast, and then you got to go out and play. And that was just idyllic. There weren't a lot of evil things going on, so our parents weren't worried about us playing in the neighborhood without some kind of supervising eye watching over them. Wasn't that there weren't wicked people back then, but when they exercised their wickedness, they were taken care of very swiftly. And so the neighborhood, the community, the nation was pretty safe. And again, there certainly were horrific things that would happen during those times, but usually the same person didn't get to do the bad acts more than once before somebody took care of them. And so it was a simple life. It was a happy life. We went to school during the school year. On Saturdays, we did our chores and got our allowance and got to play. And on Sundays, the first day of the week, we went to Sunday school and to the worship. And we kind of took it easy through the rest of the day. Sunday wasn't the Sabbath. Sabbath means seventh, but we still took it easy that day. We didn't have a lot of chores that we were expected to do. We could play, certainly, but we had to be back in time for the second worship in the evening. And then we went to bed that night, and next day got up and got ready for school and went through the whole thing again. It was far less complicated back then, and it made for a really nice life. It was simple in the fact that it wasn't complex or complicated, but it was beautiful. And again, I want to say it led for a happy life. When the prophet Micah was saying, what does God expect of you? Just before he had said that, he asked this question. In Micah 6, verse 6, with what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams and 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for the sin of my soul? No, he has showed you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. There were certainly sacrifices under the old law that had to be done. If someone had sinned, then there was a sacrifice that was required for that. But that wasn't what pleased God. It was not sinning and not having to offer the sacrifice that pleased him. And even if you offered a bunch of sacrifices, thousands of rivers of oil, 1,000 rams, that wouldn't be pleasing to him. Not nearly as much as just living a good life. And he certainly did not expect or tolerate the sacrifice of human beings. That was something that he forbade. It was something that the idol worshippers took part in, and God would not permit that. But the writer is just pointing out, it's really simple when you break it down to its essence. We live before God in a good way. I've mentioned before, I love Calvin and Hobbes, that cartoon. If you're not familiar, it's a little 6-year-old boy and his pretend tiger, who he treats as real. And one of my favorite amongst that cartoon is a time when Calvin and Hobbes are watching a falling star. And both the little boy and the tiger, they make a wish on that star. And Calvin, the little boy, tells Hobbes what his wish was. It was to be rich and powerful. And he asks Hobbes what he wished for, and Hobbes said, I wished for a peanut butter sandwich. Well, Calvin just jumped all over. What a stupid thing. You could wish for anything and you wish for a peanut butter sandwich? What's the matter with you? And then in the next frame of that cartoon, you see the two of them walking together, and Hobbes is munching contentedly on a peanut butter sandwich while Calvin is just glowering at him. And Hobbes has this classic line, I got what I wanted. Now, this is not a lesson or an encouragement to set your expectations so low that you'll never be disappointed. Instead, it's a lesson on being satisfied with the simplicity of God's plan and enjoying the simple things in life. If you love justice and you temper it with mercy, then you're going to treat your neighbor as you want to be treated. You're not going to let him do horrible things to other people, but you're going to have a little mercy on the remedy for that. And as far as living the life, you're going to be walking humbly before God. And that is going to make you happy. And that's going to make you content. It's simple in the fact that it's very basic, but it's very profound, and it's very beautiful. God has called us to a life that He wants to be filled with joy. It's when we go outside of His commandments and we get involved in sin that we find so much sorrow in this world. But if we'll do things God's way, if we'll just take hold of His simple precepts and enjoy a simple life, you can do great things and have great expectations. You just don't need to have great selfish plans that don't involve God and that don't help humanity. If you and I will walk through this life humbly before God, admiring and upholding justice, and loving mercy while we do so, and then living the life that God's called us to live, it's going to be a happy life. It's going to be a life filled with joy. And it's going to be a life that looks forward with great anticipation to heaven. And when you break it down, it's very simple. And it's very, at its most basic part. Just do the right thing. God tells us what that is in His Word. If you and I will do that, we can enjoy the simple pleasures of life. We can even enjoy accomplishing great things. But as long as we keep our focus for God and our love for our neighbor, we're going to do pretty well. It's pretty simple. It's true. But it's also very profound. It's going to give us a good life. Are you enjoying the beauty of the simple life? It's a good question, isn't it? Thanks for listening today. I hope we'll see you the next time. But until then, I pray that God will richly bless you as you seek to the best of your ability to find out what His simple will is for you, and then do it and enjoy the life that He gives you as a result of that. God bless.